Let me ask you something most people won't. What if the thing you've been trying the hardest to project is the exact thing that's been pushing her away? Not your age, not your looks, not your bank account. The way you're showing up. Because here's what I've observed quietly over a long time. There are men out there, older men, who walk into a room without saying much. They don't try to impress anyone. They don't adjust their posture when an attractive woman looks their way. They don't rehearse lines or calculate their next move. And somehow, those are the men who hold attention the longest. Let the weight of this sink in. I've seen it. You've probably seen it too, even if you couldn't explain what was happening. Meanwhile, there are guys doing everything right on paper. They're well-dressed, financially stable, articulate, but something's off. Something's not landing. And they can feel it, that slight tension, that subtle disconnect, even when the conversation seems fine on the surface. This video is about that gap. The gap between what most men think creates attraction and what actually does. And I want to narrow it down today to something incredibly specific. 2 words. 2 words that, when you actually understand what they represent psychologically, will completely reframe how you think about connection, desire, and what women are really responding to when they feel drawn to a man. Stay with me, because we're going to go deep, and what I'm going to share near the end of this about the single most underestimated quality in a mature man might be the piece you've been missing your entire life. I want to be clear about what this video is and what it isn't. This isn't a pickup guide. It's not a list of tricks. I'm not going to teach you how to manipulate anyone or manufacture chemistry from nothing. What I am going to do is walk you through the psychology of what creates genuine attraction in the context of an older man. Someone with life experience, with depth, with a different kind of presence than a 25-year-old. Because the rules are different for you. Not worse, different. And most of the advice you'll find online is built for a completely different demographic with a completely different energy. The research on attraction from attachment theory, from social psychology, from decades of behavioral science, consistently points to things that have almost nothing to do with surface-level tactics. They point inward. They point to emotional intelligence. They point to how you make someone feel in your presence, not what you say or how you look. And I've spent a long time observing the men who navigate this well naturally, without force, and comparing them to the men who struggle despite doing everything they think they're supposed to do. The difference usually comes down to 2 words. And those words aren't, "I love you." They're not, "You're beautiful." They're not even words you necessarily say out loud. They're words that describe a state of being, a way of existing in relationship to another person. I'll give them to you, but I want to build the foundation first, because without the foundation, the words are just words. With the foundation, they're everything. Here's where most men get it wrong. And I say this with respect, because I've seen smart, capable, genuinely good men fall into this exact pattern. They approach attraction the way they approach a business problem, logically, strategically. They identify what they think a woman wants, stability, humor, confidence, and they try to demonstrate those things as efficiently as possible. They lead with their resume. Not literally, but energetically. They're constantly, subtly, trying to prove something. I've done well in my career. I travel. I'm interesting. I can take care of you. And here's the cruel irony of that approach. The more you work to prove your value, the more you signal that you're not sure of it yourself. Women pick up on this, not intellectually, emotionally. They can't always name it, but they feel it. There's a tightness in the interaction, a performance, and performance creates distance, even when it's impressive. Think about the last time you were around someone who was really trying to impress you. Not necessarily romantically, just someone desperate for your approval. How did it feel? Probably a little exhausting, maybe a little suffocating. Maybe you found yourself pulling back slightly without fully understanding why. That's what happens emotionally when a man leads with effort instead of presence. And then there's the opposite mistake, which is just as common among older men, which is going the other direction and projecting an almost cold unavailability, the "I don't need anyone" energy, the hyper-independent wall. The man who's so guarded from past hurt that he stopped being truly accessible to another person. That reads as emotional withdrawal. And emotional withdrawal, no matter how composed it looks on the outside, doesn't create attraction. It creates loneliness for both people. So you've got men on one end trying too hard, men on the other end trying not to care. And somewhere in the middle, rarely talked about, rarely modeled, is where actual connection lives. That middle space isn't passive. It isn't indifferent. It isn't playing it cool. It's something much more specific. And it requires something most advice completely skips over. It requires you to understand what women are actually responding to emotionally, not logically, when they feel genuinely drawn to an older man. Let me give you the 3 psychological triggers that underpin all of this, and then I'll connect them to the 2 words. Here's a belief I want to challenge. Most men think that what women find attractive in an older man is experience. And they're not wrong, but they're thinking about experience in the wrong way. They think it means I've done a lot, traveled, built things, learned things. And yes, that context matters, but it's not the experience itself that's attractive. It's what the experience produced in the man. Because experience, when properly integrated, produces one thing above all else: a settled sense of self. Not arrogance, not rigidity, a settled sense of self. The man who knows what he values, who knows what he's not willing to compromise, who knows how he wants to spend his time and why. The man who isn't performing confidence, he's just oriented, like a compass that always finds north. Psychologically, this matters enormously, because attraction, at its deepest level, isn't just about chemistry. It's about felt safety. It's about the quiet, almost subconscious question a woman is always asking when she's around a new man. Can I relax here? Is this person who he says he is? Will he still be this person in 3 months? A settled man answers that question without words, without explanation, just through the consistency of how he moves, how he speaks, what he doesn't feel the need to defend. And here's the paradox. The less you need her to confirm your value, the more valuable you seem to her. This isn't manipulation. It's just the psychology of how certainty reads emotionally. Certainty is grounding, and most people, men and women alike, are quietly drawn to people who feel grounded, because so few of us actually are. So the first trigger is this: settled certainty about who you are creates emotional safety, and emotional safety is the foundation of attraction. Not safety as in boring, safety as in she can be herself around you because you're not going to shift based on her mood, her approval, or her validation. That's rare, and rare things hold attention. Now, here's where older men often make a quiet, well-intentioned mistake. Because they're settled. Because they have that groundedness we just talked about. Some men start to relate to the world from a place of, I've already figured this out. They've already formed their opinions. They've already processed most experiences. They're finished, in a sense, with discovery. And that settledness, when it tips into closedness, creates a very different kind of energy. It's the difference between a man who is certain and a man who is closed. And those two things look similar from the outside, but feel completely different up close. The man who is certain can walk into a conversation with a woman and be genuinely curious about her perspective, even if it's different from his, even if she's younger, even if she sees the world differently. His certainty doesn't require her to confirm it, so he's free to be curious. The man who is closed is threatened by difference. He either needs to correct her, educate her, or dismiss her, because his identity is so attached to being right that someone else's different view feels like an attack. Curiosity is one of the most underrated qualities in human connection. And I'm not talking about polite, performative curiosity. That's interesting, tell me more, said on autopilot. I mean genuine, alive interest in how another person experiences being human. Research in relational psychology consistently shows that people feel most connected not when someone agrees with them, but when someone truly tries to understand them. When they feel seen, not just heard. And for an older man, genuine curiosity does something else. It communicates that you haven't calcified, that you're still growing, still interested, still in the game of being alive and learning, not just waiting out the clock. That is deeply attractive because it signals vitality, not physical vitality, but psychological and emotional vitality. A sense that this person is still engaged with life, still curious about people, still open. And here's the subtle part. Curiosity is not about asking a lot of questions. It's about listening in a way that makes her feel like what she said actually landed somewhere, like it actually mattered to you, like you were genuinely present, not just waiting for your turn. Most people never experience that kind of attention. When they do, they don't forget it. So the second trigger is this. Genuine curiosity communicates presence, vitality, and emotional intelligence, and it makes people feel more alive in your company than almost anything else you could do. This is the one most men completely skip, and it's the one that separates the men who are technically doing everything right from the men who actually create something real. I want to talk about emotional permission. Stay with me on this because I'm going to say something that might feel counterintuitive at first. Most men, especially high-functioning, successful older men, have been rewarded their entire lives for emotional control, for not showing too much, for staying measured, for keeping things together under pressure. And that quality serves them beautifully in many areas of life. But in intimacy and attraction, it can quietly become a wall. Because here's what happens emotionally when you are always composed, always measured, always managed. The woman across from you doesn't know where to put her own feelings. She doesn't know if it's safe to be real with you. She doesn't know if vulnerability will be welcomed or made to feel like too much. So she starts managing herself too. She pulls back. She becomes a more curated version of herself. And suddenly, what could have been a genuine connection becomes a very polished, very pleasant, very disconnected experience. Emotional permission is the ability to be honestly, quietly present with your own emotional reality in a way that gives her permission to be honest with hers. This is not about being emotional in the performative sense. It's not about oversharing or processing out loud. It's something much more subtle. It's the willingness to say, at the right moment, that hit me differently than I expected. Or to let something she said actually land visibly instead of immediately responding. It's the willingness to show, gently and without drama, that you're a person who actually feels things, who is actually moved by life, who hasn't traded away their emotional aliveness for the appearance of strength. And for older men, this matters for a specific reason. Many women, particularly women who've had their own experiences of emotional unavailability in relationships, are deeply attuned to this. They're not necessarily looking for it consciously, but they're scanning for it, unconsciously, always. The man who gives emotional permission, who is grounded enough to feel without being overwhelmed by it, and honest enough to let that be visible occasionally, creates a very different experience than the man who is simply impressive and impenetrable. One feels like someone you could build something with. The other feels like someone you'll always be slightly on the outside of. And the deepest form of attraction, the kind that doesn't fade after the first few weeks, is rooted in the feeling that you can be completely yourself with this person, that your full self, not just your polished, presentable self, is welcome here. That feeling begins with you modeling it first. So trigger 3 is this: emotional permission. The quiet willingness to be honestly human in your own presence is the rarest and most compelling quality a mature man can offer. It's what turns attraction into something that actually lasts. Now, the 2 words. After everything I've just described, the settled certainty, the genuine curiosity, the emotional permission, when you look at those 3 things together, they all point to the same underlying state. The 2 words are secure presence, not confidence. Confidence is often performed, not strength. Strength is often armored. Secure presence. Secure, meaning you're not seeking approval from the interaction. You don't need her to confirm your worth. You enter the conversation whole, and you'll leave it whole, regardless of the outcome. Presence, meaning you're actually here, not in your head rehearsing the next thing to say, not distracted by how you're coming across, not performing a version of yourself you think she wants to see, Just here, paying attention, actually in the room. Those two words, held together, describe a way of existing in an interaction that almost no one teaches and almost no one masters because it requires real inner work, not external technique. And here's what makes it feel like a kind of subtle power when you encounter it in a man. Secure presence can't be faked for long. It's not something you can put on like a well-fitted jacket. It radiates from how you respond when something unexpected happens, from how you handle silence, from whether you feel the need to fill every quiet moment with something impressive. The men who operate from secure presence, and there are not many of them, which is why they're so noticeable when you encounter one, they don't chase, they don't cling, they don't diminish themselves to avoid conflict or inflate themselves to avoid vulnerability. They're just there, fully, calmly, genuinely. And that is, in every sense of the word, magnetic. Let me bring this into something real, because I don't want this to live purely in the abstract. Imagine you're having dinner with a woman you find interesting. Early on, maybe second or third time you've met. And she says something about her life, maybe about a career change she's considering, or something she's navigating with a family member, something real. The average response, the autopilot response, is advice, or comparison. I went through something similar, here's what I did. Or worse, a quick fix. Have you tried? The response from secure presence is different. It doesn't rush to fix. It doesn't immediately pivot to your own story. It sits with what she said for a moment. Maybe you say something like, "That sounds like a harder decision than it might look from the outside." And then you wait. You let that land. You're actually curious what she'll say next, not because you're following a formula, but because you genuinely want to understand where she is. That pause, that willingness to sit in what she said before redirecting, communicates something she might not be able to articulate, but will absolutely feel. He's not just waiting for his turn. He's actually here with me. That's presence, and it costs nothing to give it, and most people almost never experience it. Here's another example. Let's say the conversation goes to something you actually feel strongly about, a topic you care about, and she has a different view. The insecure response is to either immediately try to convince her you're right, or to fold your position to agree with her. Both are forms of the same thing. Your comfort depends on her approval. The secure response is to hold your view calmly, acknowledge hers genuinely, and be interested in the gap. I see it differently, but I'm curious how you got there. No defensiveness, no capitulation, just two people who are both allowed to see things differently and are interested in each other anyway. That's secure presence in action, and from the outside, it reads as confidence. But it feels, to the woman across from you, like something much more specific. Like she doesn't have to manage you. Like you're not fragile. Like she can be real with you. You don't have to be perfect in these moments. You don't have to always say the right thing. In fact, one of the qualities of a securely present man is that he doesn't catastrophize small, awkward moments. He doesn't overcorrect or over-apologize. He just moves through them naturally, without drama. And that steadiness, that ability to be imperfect without unraveling, is one of the quietest and most powerful things you can show. Let me give you one more, and this one's about the beginning, the very first impression. When you meet someone new, there's a natural temptation to establish yourself, to give her a reason to be interested, to lay out your resume, your accomplishments, your interesting life. Resist that. Not because those things aren't real, but because leading with them is the logical approach. And attraction doesn't respond to logic first. It responds to feeling. Instead, try arriving at the conversation genuinely curious about who she is. Ask something that requires more than a one-word answer, not a canned, getting-to-know-you question, but something that comes from actually noticing her. What's keeping you engaged lately? Or, you seem like someone who thinks about things. What's been on your mind? These aren't lines. They're genuine invitations into real conversation. And when she responds, actually listen. Let it inform your next thought. Let the conversation be built from her answers, not from your prepared material. When you do share about yourself, let it come naturally in response to something she said, not as a presentation. That shift from monologue to dialogue, from impressing to connecting, is immediately felt, and it will set you apart from almost every other interaction she's had that day. If what I've talked about today resonated with you not just intellectually, but somewhere a little deeper, then I want to offer you something. Because for a lot of men, hearing this and living this are two very different things. The concepts aren't complicated, but applying them requires a kind of inner work that isn't always easy to navigate alone. I've put together a short guide, completely free, that goes into some of what we touched on today in more practical depth. It's called The Inner Foundation, and it's essentially a framework for developing secure presence from the inside out. Not as a tactic, but as a genuine shift in how you relate to yourself and other people. You can find the link in the description below. No pressure, no pitch, just something I put together because this conversation matters to me, and I know it matters to a lot of you. Take it if it's useful, leave it if it's not. Let me leave you with this. Everything we've talked about today, the settled certainty, the genuine curiosity, the emotional permission, the secure presence, none of it is about attracting a woman in the transactional sense. It's about becoming the kind of person that genuine connection is possible with. And here's the thing about that. When you do the inner work to become more securely present, not for her, but for yourself, it changes everything. Not just your relationships, the way you move through the world, the way you handle difficulty, the way you feel at the end of a day. Attraction is a byproduct of that, not the goal of it. The men who try to manufacture attraction, who learn techniques and scripts and strategies, sometimes get short-term results, but they're always on the treadmill, always needing the next technique, always slightly anxious that the performance might slip. The men who develop genuine secure presence don't have that problem, because they're not performing, they're just being. And being, fully and honestly, is something most people experience so rarely that when they encounter it, they want to stay near it. You have something, as an older man, that no young man can manufacture. Actual depth, actual experience, actual scar tissue that's been processed into wisdom rather than bitterness. Don't hide that. Don't try to compete on youth. Don't try to be impressive in the ways you used to be. Be present instead. Be secure in who you are, not who you were, and not who you're trying to become. Who you are, right now, in this chapter of your life. That's the thing that's rare. That's the thing that holds attention. That's the thing that doesn't fade. 2 words. Secure presence. That's what the men who do this well have figured out. Not tricks, not timing, just the quiet, grounded willingness to show up fully, honestly, without apology. If this landed for you in some way, I'd love to know in the comments. Tell me what resonated. Tell me what you're still working through. I read more of those than you might expect. And if you haven't yet, consider subscribing, not because the algorithm needs it, although it does, but because this is a conversation worth continuing. We go deeper every week, and there's a lot more ground to cover. I'll see you in the next one.